Hey, welcome back, everybody. Good Monday. Hopefully, we're having a wonderful start to the week out there, and all eyes are on the Caribbean and eventually the Gulf of Mexico as what is shaping up to be potentially major Hurricane Helene is eyeing portions of the United States. And it's going to be one of those weeks that I think really this is just going to be the main topic. Now, we will discuss some other active weather happening within the United States, definitely, but really this is going to be the big time thing that a lot of people are focused on, and for good reason, because I think this one really has the potential to be kind of the storm of the season or the storm of the year, however you want to look at it. Compared to what we've seen so far impact the United States, I think this one could really kind of top the other storms, including Francine, Beryl, and Debbie. And then obviously we'll see what October has in store, but definitely the most impactful storm we've seen so far this hurricane season, and maybe just overall in general throughout all of 2024 across all seasons. We'll see by the time all is said and done. So again, going to talk a lot about that in today's video. I do want to say thank you. Last night's video did very well on the channel, so welcome to all the new subscribers. We gained a good amount off of that. And also thank you to all the regulars who are coming back. It's great to see you again. And definitely let me know in the comments if you are a returning viewer or a new subscriber. Also let me know what you're seeing out in your neck of the woods. Also, while you're there, go ahead, if you haven't already, hit the subscribe button. We're knocking on the doorstep of 10,000, which was kind of our big milestone by the end of hurricane season. And I think we can get there by the end of September with a week left in the month. I think that's definitely a doable goal. So again, if you haven't already subscribed, please do so. Like the video. And then, like I mentioned, comment, let me know where you're watching from, if you're a returning viewer, a new subscriber, or just kind of how long you've been watching. And consider sharing the video with somebody that you think might need it here along the Gulf Coast and even inland, further from just the coastline into the southeast, where we're likely to see some pretty big impacts here again out of future Helene. All right, let's go ahead and dive into things here. We'll start with satellite imagery. And again, it's a storm that is not formed yet, but very close to it and beginning to get its act together. Now, you're looking at satellite here, and you're thinking, all right, well, is the center of the storm kind of right here under all of this heavy convection? Let me pick a color, you can probably see a little bit better. And no, not technically, actually. We're still seeing the main area of vorticity, at least where the National Hurricane Center has it pinned, is kind of just off the coast of Honduras and Guatemala here. And I think what could happen, though, with all of this convection is it could kind of tug this center, or what's trying to become the center, further east under this storm system. And there's also some other factors in the Pacific that may try to push this east a little bit. So that'll be a trend we'll have to watch. But still, the thought is sometime today this will form into a named storm and eventually kind of ride up through the Caribbean here and then get up into the Gulf of Mexico, right through that gap between the Yucatan Peninsula and Cuba. So again, on satellite right now, not much else to really discuss. Still just waiting on a storm to officially form. But again, you'll notice plenty of convection bubbling up out here, which is a good sign that, or not a good sign for us, but a good sign for the storm, that the environmental conditions are conducive for development. And again, I really think we'll have a named storm here by the end of today or early tomorrow at the latest. And the National Hurricane Center agrees here. Latest map here from them, this just came out. We are seeing now a 80% chance of development within the next 48 hours and a 90% chance within the next 7 days. But again, I feel pretty confident sometime today or tomorrow at the latest, we will have Helene officially formed here into the Caribbean. And then by the time we get into Wednesday, it'll begin to work into the Gulf of Mexico, and then a likely landfall by Thursday evening, early into Friday. Now, there's another area behind this, and the good news here, again, obviously it's red on the map. It's got a 70% chance of developing within the next 7 days, but the good news is most models really kind of just develop this and then curve it out to sea. So we're not really going to talk about that one today because I don't see any direct impacts to anybody on land here. So obviously that's a good thing. We don't want to see those impacts, and unfortunately we're going to have more than enough impacts to deal with Helene. So we'll leave that area out to the Atlantic to its own device and just kind of let it keep on spinning and doing what it does. All right, so we do officially have spaghetti models for, again, what is about to become Helene, or Invest 97L is the current name of this area. And for once in our lives, we get lucky and we have pretty good confidence on the track in a way. Now, obviously, you're saying, all right, well, this is absolutely making landfall right here into kind of the Big Bend of Florida into the Appalachia Cola area. And while that is definitely a possibility, I don't want you to take this verbatim, because I'll tell you right now, this is going to windshield wiper a little bit this way and maybe a little bit this way, and the final area that it lands on is going to be a little different. However, we are still nonetheless seeing pretty good confidence somewhere in the Florida Panhandle or Big Bend. I think is going to get a landfall out of the system. Now, you folks in Louisiana, or especially Mississippi, Alabama, and even down the west coast of Florida, don't let your guard down, because sometimes the steering mechanisms can be off a little bit, and especially in this scenario, what is steering this system, and we'll talk about it, is a notoriously tough thing to forecast. So we'll mention that, obviously, but again, overall speaking, pretty good confidence in the models, at least compared to some of the other storms we've had recently, which there's been a lot less confidence in. So again, feeling pretty confident about that. All right, we're going to go ahead and dive into some model guidance. We're going to start zoomed out a little bit, and then we're going to zoom in. We're going to just take a look at the GFS, the European, and then a hurricane model, because, again, I don't think we need to jump around and show a whole bunch of models today. I think the big three here are going to kind of get it done for us. So starting with vorticity at 850 millibars, this is vorticity just above the surface here. I say just above the surface, 850 millibars is a good probably kilometer up or so, but still, it's relatively close to the surface compared to how deep the troposphere is here, in terms of overall mass, at least, is how we measure this with the millibar. But either way, point stands here. We've got vorticity beginning to form here, or just think of it as low pressure on this map. Anytime you see these bright colors and these isobars becoming circular, that is vorticity developing. And latest GFS here develops a kind of tight center of this storm by this afternoon. And notice where it does it. It does it quite far from where the NHC has its current kind of X on the map. Again, I showed you earlier, the X is kind of here right now from the National Hurricane Center. The GFS kind of says that convection that is so far to the east of the storm is going to tug it that way. We're going to get a center of circulation to kind of form under that convection and eventually tighten up a little bit here. And we've got a well-defined center of circulation by Wednesday morning. Again, so this is now through today, Monday, through Tuesday, and by Wednesday morning, the GFS already has a hurricane right near the tip of the Yucatan Peninsula here, and a pretty strong one. So that's going to be very important. How quickly does the center of this storm form? The GFS does it very quickly, and because of that, as we zoom in here, we get a storm that develops into a major hurricane because it's got that well-defined core and it moves it over absolute rocket fuel in the Gulf of Mexico. And then we see a pretty, very impactful storm, unfortunately. So we'll move this ahead in time. This is getting into Wednesday evening. At this point, the GFS has our storm system here just kind of to the north west of the tip of Cuba there as a major hurricane, and continues to strengthen it throughout the overnight Wednesday. By the time we're waking up Thursday morning, we've got a 940 to 950 millibar major hurricane. This would probably be a category 3 or 4 storm working up and along the west coast of Florida. Now, granted, the center of the storm is off the coast by a good 100 miles or so. This is Thursday afternoon, but also another thing to notice, look at how large this storm is. I mean, if I circle kind of just what the center all the way out to the feeder bands, this thing is stretching from Cuba all the way up to South Georgia with its rainfall. And that's going to be a very big key in the impacts with this storm. Very often, we see different types of impacts with different size storms. And unfortunately, large storms are notorious for bringing more impacts to more people, obviously, due to the size of the storm, but also increasing things like storm surge. We've got a lot more energy over a broader area. That's going to create stronger areas of surge and bigger areas of surge. So again, more people would feel the surge kind of along the coastline here, and it wouldn't just be confined to one small area. Also, this spreads out the wind field. So in a case like this, probably almost the entire state of Florida would be feeling tropical storm force winds at some point just due to the size of the system. Now, we move this ahead. We get landfall during Thursday evening, right around sunset, into the Big Bend of Florida on this run of the GFS. So again, I showed you all those spaghetti models, and all of them brought this basically right over kind of the Apalachicola area. But the GFS here is bringing this kind of right over the Big Bend of Florida. So again, I'm sorry, I'm just pulling up a map to make sure I can kind of look at some of these communities, make sure I've got them correct here. So yeah, again, right through the Apalachicola area is where most of the spaghetti models brought this, but the GFS kind of brings it right into the Big Bend, a little bit closer to the Perry, Florida area, even a little bit further down the coast than that, as again, a major hurricane landfall here overnight Thursday, really Thursday evening, not even during the overnight, and then pulls it northward into Georgia and right up into upstate South Carolina by Friday morning as still a very strong low pressure system, and this would bring big time inland impacts. I know a lot of folks at the coast are worried, as you should be about this one, but you folks inland too, I am concerned about the potential of big time impacts well inland, especially the state of Georgia, potentially the state of Alabama, South Carolina, North Carolina. Again, it's all going to depend where this center of low pressure goes after it hits the coast, but I think somebody inland is going to have big time power outage concern, a lot of heavy rain, and really just overall tropical storm conditions well inland. Again, a pretty quick moving system. This isn't one that's just kind of stalling. So, you folks that went through Hugo, for example, not comparing the storm to Hugo, but again, you remember it hit the coast and it was just absolutely booking it. So by the time it got to Columbia and Charlotte, it hadn't had time to weaken. I think this could be one similar to that. Again, maybe not to the intensity of that, but you get the overall idea here that this is one that's going to bring impacts well inland. All right, let's take a look at the European now and kind of what it does. And this is where the models are different or have a bit of a difference. So this is this afternoon. Again, I showed you the GFS at this point already had a very tight area of circulation here. The European does have a closed Vort millibar here at 850 millibars, but it's not nearly as strong and not as condensed as the GFS. And overall, the European just takes much more time to strengthen this. At this point, again, Wednesday morning, as this is getting into the Gulf of Mexico, the European definitely has a storm here, probably a tropical storm. But when I showed you the GFS at this point, it had a hurricane, almost a major hurricane already as this was crossing into the Gulf of Mexico. The European is much more delayed in that process and thus is a weaker storm upon approach to the Gulf Coast. Now, I'll mention, generally speaking, model bias-wise, the GFS normally is a little overzealous, and the European is normally a little underdone. So, if you want to take a middle road here, we still have a big-time, probably major hurricane on approach to Florida, even if you take kind of the mean of both of the models. However, I will say the GFS has done relatively well this year with intensity. It's kind of picked up on a couple storms ahead of time. For example, Debbie, the European, barely had a tropical depression on approach to Florida, and that ended up becoming a pretty feisty tropical storm to Category 1 hurricane upon landfall, which is what the GFS kind of had predicted. So, the GFS has done relatively well with intensity this year, and that's why I'm especially kind of leaning towards the GFS guidance here in terms of overall impacts, at least with intensity. Now, track-wise, maybe some room for improvement there. But again, model has done relatively well this year. All right, so like I mentioned, the European weaker on approach to the Gulf. So because of that, a weaker storm in the Gulf, and it's a big time difference. I mean, we're looking at a 40 millibar difference between the GFS and the European just 3 or 4 days from now, really about 3 days from now, I guess, here by the time we get into Thursday here. But either way, the European does show a strong storm and probably a hurricane here on approach. And by the time we hit Thursday afternoon, we get landfall right into the Apalachicola area where most of those spaghetti models were. And then overnight Thursday into early Friday, moving inland into South Georgia as a feisty storm, moving up into the Atlanta area by Friday morning, and then eventually up through the Nashville area by Friday afternoon. So again, booking it pretty good here. It's only going to take about 24 hours from this storm to get from its landfall point up to probably the Tennessee River Valley. So again, moving at a pretty good clip here, which luckily will bring down rainfall totals a little bit, but unfortunately that will really increase the wind speed potential further inland with this storm system. So again, those are kind of two of the big models here. Don't worry, we're going to dive more into impacts here in just a moment, but let's take a look at the ingredients for the storm and kind of decipher how strong we think the storm could get. So I talked about this a lot in last night's video. I'm going to continue to mention it. There's 3 big kind of ingredients for tropical cyclone intensification. Number 1, you need warm ocean waters. Again, these are tropical systems for a reason. They do not form off of fronts. They do not form over land, obviously. They completely form just off of the heat content of the ocean and the latent heat release process that begins over the ocean here. And that's what's going to happen with this storm. And unfortunately, Helene here is going to move right over the warmest waters in the Atlantic Ocean. Again, I'll just kind of draw where the storm is likely to form somewhere into here, and I'll draw the general path it's going to take. give or take something kind of like this, to the right or left some. But you get the point. This is moving right over some of the warmest waters here, specifically into the central Gulf of Mexico and down here into the northwestern Caribbean. We've got areas near 90-degree Fahrenheit water, which, again, is just absolute rocket fuel for these storms. And it's going to really promote pretty strong development with this system. Now, it's not the only thing you need for tropical development. You also need the second ingredient, and that is a moist environment. These systems do not like dry air. It kind of rips them apart, or I say rips them apart, kind of dries them out is a better way to put it. Wind shear is a better example of something that rips it apart. But again, obviously, you get big thunderstorms during hurricanes, and you need a lot of moisture for that. You can't really do it off of dry air. So taking a look at the ingredients on that side of things here, through today, through tomorrow, a big pocket of moisture here into the Western Caribbean where the storm is beginning to form. And again, this is why it's important how strong the storm gets in the Caribbean before crossing into the Gulf. Again, GFS basically has a major hurricane almost crossing from the Caribbean to the Gulf. And because of that, by the time we get into Thursday, as the storm is in the Gulf of Mexico, you're noticing, there's a lot of dry air here on the kind of western side of the storm that's trying to get into it. So that should help us out, right? Yeah, it definitely doesn't hurt by any means, but unfortunately, if the storm already has a very well-defined center of circulation and kind of a closed-off eye and a pretty vigorous eye wall, it's going to take a lot for this dry air to kind of degrade the storm a little bit. And again, you're noticing in terms of what's actually penetrating the storm is almost set up like a defensive line here, or a defensive wall that this dry air is really struggling to get through. And unfortunately, because of that, the storm doesn't really, have any influence from that dry air and continues to maintain strong intensity up to landfall. And then eventually after landfall, that dry air begins to do its magic a little bit here and erode the southern side of the storm. But at that point, it'd be more of a wind threat with the system anyway as it moves inland. And if anything, this dry air could unfortunately just enhance a tornado risk after landfall. So again, unfortunately, the dry air is there. It's just I'm not sure how much it's really going to do to help us out here. Again, though, if the storm takes longer to develop here in the short and medium range, then that dry air could do a lot more to disrupt it once it gets into the Gulf. That's kind of one of the reasons the European is a little bit weaker in intensity. All right. Third and final ingredient for tropical development, you don't want any wind shear. You want nice calm winds. You don't want very strong winds. You don't want calm winds at the surface, strong winds above. You just want, calm conditions. And unfortunately, that's what the storm has currently, and it's going to have it really through its entire life cycle here into the Caribbean. Now, I'll mention we do have a tropical system out here into the Pacific here. I forget the name of this one. I probably should have checked, but we do have a pretty, feisty storm just off the coast of Mexico. And what's kind of happening a little bit is we're getting divergence out from that storm. So what that could help us with a little bit here in the short run is increasing kind of some of that sinking motion here towards our current storm. Again, what goes up kind of must come down here. So, just kind of draw these a little bit. Again, that could help us a little bit in the near term with the storm. We'll see. It's kind of one of those ingredients that it's there. We just don't know how strong it's going to actually be in terms of helping us. Another thing it could do, though, is it could tug at the center, again, even further east a little bit. So the latest run I showed you of the GFS that pulls us into the Big Bend of Florida and up through the upstate. Again, if the center forms closer to Cuba, that may be a more likely scenario. So we'll have to wait and see. But overall, wind shear is pretty calm for this storm. Again, I move this ahead into time. By the time this is crossing into the Gulf of Mexico, you'll notice here, if I kind of draw out these streamlines, which again, it's just kind of the direction that the winds are taking here in the upper levels of the atmosphere. The storm getting fanned out pretty good. Now, again, the outflow from the specific storm is blowing towards the storm a little bit. So we'll see how much that can help us. Again, maybe that can limit intensification a little bit in the near term. It's something we'll watch for, something we'll hope for. But unfortunately, don't get your hopes too high. And then eventually the storm pulls north. And even on approach to Florida, wind shear increasing a little bit. But again, it's kind of curving a little bit too quickly and not really going right over the storm like you would hope to help weaken it. So I think definitely the best conditions for the storm will be right now into tomorrow and probably into Wednesday. On final approach, conditions become less conducive for intensification. But again, if we have a strong storm at that point, it's going to probably not do a whole lot to weaken the storm either. So the next 24 to 48 hours is really important in the forecast intensity of this system. All right, what about the track? Again, where is this going? Obviously, we took a look at some spaghetti models, but what are the overall steering currents here? And it's really all going to come down to this guy. A big cutoff low that is kind of broken off from the jet stream is diving down into the Mississippi River Valley here. And this is going to be a big ingredient for where the storm goes. Now, these cutoff lows are notoriously difficult to forecast, unfortunately. Again, they're cut off from the flow of the atmosphere. Sometimes they kind of have a mind of their own. And even just yesterday, this cutoff low looked like it might be over Oklahoma, Arkansas, Texas. I don't know why I draw high pressure for that, sorry. This cutoff low pressure, again, it looked yesterday like it was more over Oklahoma and Texas. Today, now it's shifting further to the east, and I mentioned that as a possibility. And because of that, again, the GFS pulls the storm further east up into the Big Bend of Florida, and then through Georgia and South Carolina. Again, this trough kind of picks it up, and again, it kind of has a wind that goes around it like this. So, you get the general idea. That's why we have a further east track on some of the latest operational runs. Again, gets pulled north there by the storm. So it's going to be very important. Where is this cutoff low? How far east is it? How far west is it? Again, I don't think it's not a matter of is this going to hit Texas or hit South Florida, for example, like it could have been a couple of days ago. Again, feeling confident this is going to go somewhere into this region. But again, that's still a pretty wide spread here. Anyone from Mississippi to the west coast of Florida should be watching the storm pretty vigorously here, due to any small changes, again, would have big time impacts on your local forecast. Now, I can show you some ensembles as well here. These are the latest GFS ensembles. Again, good agreement. This is going somewhere from, the Florida Panhandle all the way back down to the Big Bend of Florida. Big time confidence on that. But again, that's a big spread here. So, you got some members, again, that take it into the Big Bend. A lot of members that take it into Apalachicola. Some members that take it into kind of Panama City and Destin. So you need to, again, watch it throughout all these places, as any small changes have a big impact on the long run forecast. And you see that on the European ensembles as well. Again, relatively high confidence, but still a spread anywhere from the Big Bend to kind of Mobile, Alabama here on the European ensemble members. So it's gonna play a lot of havoc on obviously who sees the worst of it. And also, I'll mention, if we go back to the GFS really quickly, those inland impacts are going to be very different. If we get a track like this through the upstate of South Carolina, or if we get a track through Alabama, who sees the worst of it is going to change obviously as well once we get past the coastline. All right, final thing I'm going to show you with, actually, it's not the final thing I'm going to show you. I completely lied. We've got a couple more maps to go through. But I did want to show you one hurricane model here for potential Helene. This is the H-Wharf model, and unfortunately, H-Wharf is, we got a pretty good track record, all things considered. This afternoon, this is basically right now, again, already shows this is a weak kind of, mess out there, but then quickly ramps it up this afternoon. By the time we get into Tuesday evening, we've got a 983 millibar hurricane still in the Caribbean, and then eventually shoots the gap here, almost clipping the tip of Cuba here as a major hurricane overnight tomorrow night into the early morning hours of Wednesday, and then into the Gulf again as a very strong major hurricane Wednesday afternoon. Continues to strengthen throughout the afternoon Wednesday into the evening. And at this point, just to give you an idea of where we're at, again, here's the center of the storm. This is Tampa Bay. This is Fort Myers and Cape Coral. So again, you'll notice this is kind of moving up through, or not through the west coast of Florida, but just offshore of the west coast of Florida as a major hurricane. Continues that. And then makes landfall into the Big Bend here, again, closer to what the GFS showed by Thursday during the almost early morning through late afternoon hours. And then moves through South Georgia here as still a very strong system with very strong winds, heavy rainfall, and then inland up through the Atlanta metro by the evening of Thursday, bringing very strong winds, again, torrential rainfall through North Georgia, the Western Carolinas, even portions of Alabama, and then moves us up into Tennessee and Kentucky as a weaker system by our Friday. So again, that's new. That just came out. I just looked at it for the first time with you. And again, just goes to show a bit of a concerning picture here on a lot of our models. All right, let's take a look at some of the max winds here, the potential, again, for those impacts. And we'll start with the overall wind forecast, I guess is what I was going to say. And we'll move this ahead in time. So this is Thursday morning, and this is the latest European. And you know what? Actually, let's switch to the GFS. Just because, again, I kind of have a hunch that this might be a better model to use for this example. Even though it is a little far east in the track right now, again, I think we could see an east trend here with the latest guidance. So we'll see if that happens. Again, just kind of my gut feeling, just my forecast. We'll see what happens. But Wind gust, again, it stays calm obviously through the next couple of days, but as we get into Wednesday afternoon and overnight Wednesday into Thursday especially, here comes the storm. Very strong winds overnight Wednesday beginning to pick up through the Florida Peninsula. Tropical storm warnings probably going to be issued for much of the state at least. And then we move this further ahead through our Thursday afternoon and look at some of these winds. Again, this is what I was talking about with the size of the storm. The center 100 miles offshore, but you're getting wind gusts near hurricane force here along the west coast of Florida, from Fort Myers up through Tampa Bay, and then up into the Big Bend here by Thursday afternoon and evening. And then here comes landfall. Again, during that time frame, you're going to get winds gusting well past 100 miles an hour likely here with a very strong system like this. And then look at these winds spreading inland. Again, obviously the coastline needs to be concerned, and obviously we're going to have big time storm surge out of this depending on exactly where the center goes. And we'll talk about storm surge once we get that map from the NHC, which will probably be tonight or tomorrow. But again, then this moves inland overnight Thursday into Friday. I mean, these are big time wind gusts, folks. And this is probably overdone by a little bit, don't get me wrong, but we could see hurricane force winds well inland through South Georgia, through the Florida Panhandle, again, potentially Alabama, depending on the track. And then eventually, this moves up through the Atlanta metro, Atlanta, Greenville, Spartanburg. Again, if the track takes this way, overnight Thursday into Friday, we could see widespread higher end tropical storm force wind gusts here, again, through these major metros, and these big time Carolina pines are not built to withstand that. And then this moves up inland, and then those high winds continue throughout the morning hours of Friday through the upstate and through the mountains of western North Carolina, which obviously this isn't the big concern, but unfortunately this could, wreak big time havoc on our fall foliage. Which, again, obviously isn't the biggest concern, but it is something that a lot of people obviously don't want to see happen. So, a storm that really I don't think anybody wants, which, no one wants any storm, generally speaking. But this one especially, I think, is one that just kind of has not a good feeling for many folks. All right, rainfall, again, the storm is large, so more people are going to see a lot of rain. The good news, again, it's moving quickly, so I do expect a pretty good swath here from the west coast of Florida, up through the Panhandle, up through somewhere inland through Georgia, the upstate of South Carolina, maybe Alabama, where we get half a foot to a foot of rain right near immediate landfall, and the west coast of Florida, again, I think more likely a foot just due to how large the storm is. You're going to be seeing that rain for a while. And then again, the western Carolinas, Greenville, Spartanburg, Oconee, Pickens County, up through those upslopes, southern-facing slopes of Transylvania County, Henderson County, Jackson County, and kind of right here through the escarpment. A lot of rain likely on the way, and something you're going to want to watch. That combined with the wind, again, could bring down a lot of trees depending on the exact track this storm takes. All right, we went about 30 minutes talking about that system. Let's go ahead and talk about what else is happening in the country here really quickly, because again, I know not everyone watching lives in the Southeast, and I know we got folks in the Midwest, the Northeast, the Plains, the Rockies, the West Coast, everywhere. So let's go ahead and discuss what's happening elsewhere as well. Latest water vapor loop here for our Monday. Again, we do have a bit of a kind of storm system crossing the country right now, and this has brought a very big area of rainfall, and then another front kind of up here to Canada, bringing some rain through the Northeast. This has brought beneficial rain, rain that a lot of folks have wanted, a lot of folks have needed, which is definitely some good news here for you folks out this way. And I think as we take a look at radar here, you'll notice we're definitely seeing some of that rain, widespread areas of it here from New York State all the way back down towards the areas of Pennsylvania, West Virginia. Virginia seeing some pretty good showers this morning. Also, more heavy rainfall here through southern Missouri, working into Illinois, Indiana. Heavy rainfall back through the Dallas-Fort Worth area. So again, we've got pockets of pretty good rainfall, and I do think this afternoon we will have a bit of a severe weather threat as well due to these storm systems, which we'll talk about in a moment. But latest watches, warnings, and advisories. Again, we are seeing some flooding here into Missouri. I mentioned a lot of rainfall in that way. We still have some coastal flooding concerns due to some of those king tides going on through portions of the East Coast. But other than that, things are relatively quiet on the current watches and warning map. Again, though, I do think that will probably change here as we go ahead into time. All right, latest model guidance here. We'll move this through this afternoon. Again, more of the same this afternoon, I think. Widespread rainfall up into the Northeast here. as that kind of weak front works on through, and then some more rain back through southern Indiana, Illinois, back through the St. Louis area, and then down through the Ozarks. Now, as we get into this afternoon, I am watching for a bit of a severe weather threat out here through portions of Kentucky, southern Indiana, Illinois, again back through the Ozarks into the Little Rock area. Could see some strong storms in this region this afternoon. And by the time we get into this afternoon and evening, also don't rule out a couple strong storms here into the Carolinas, Tennessee, and into southern Virginia. Really, if we were to just circle a super big area, and I know this is a big area, but anyone kind of in this circle, do expect the chance of a couple strong storms this afternoon. Main threats would be strong straight line winds, cannot rule out some hail, and maybe even a brief isolated tornado. But again, I think straight line winds are going to be the biggest concern out of this afternoon and evening as that rain works on through. Now we get through the overnight, and again, more rounds of these showers and storms roll on through, some rumbles of thunder, again, working on through, and you'll notice that low pressure deepening at the surface here by tomorrow morning, seeing widespread rain through Illinois, Indiana, Ohio, again, back down through the Mississippi River Valley. So just kind of a showery day today, a showery day tomorrow for a lot of folks. And then that continues to work on through the Ohio River Valley. And by Tuesday afternoon, another threat of severe weather here, kind of through the same region in here. West Virginia, Kentucky, Tennessee, the Carolinas, and then back through southern Indiana, Illinois, and Ohio. Again, I think maybe even a bit more of a tornado threat kind of in this region tomorrow through Kentucky, southern Indiana, Ohio, maybe down through Tennessee. But again, most folks having the threat of at least some strong straight line winds tomorrow. And then that continues during the evening hours, and then another round of moisture kind of works on through the overnight Tuesday into Wednesday. And by the time we go later in this week, we'll kind of continue the trend. This is Wednesday morning. Again, you'll notice widespread rain falling through much of the southeast and really just east of the Mississippi River Valley in general. Seeing some pretty good rainfall that works on through, and then obviously here comes Helene after the fact that is going to make landfall probably Thursday or Friday, probably more likely Thursday, I would say at this point. And then that works inland and brings its own impacts, which obviously we discussed on a little bit. But we'll talk more about that later on down the road as we know a little bit more about the exact track and intensity of Helene. All right, rainfall over the next 72 hours. Again, we are expecting a pretty good amount here through the Ohio and Tennessee river valleys. I wouldn't be surprised. This is now through Thursday morning. Some folks could pick up on a quick couple of inches here, which again, this is an area that I know a lot of people have been asking for some rainfall. So definitely, hopefully you get it. Also, unfortunately, any heavy rain that falls over the next little bit through kind of Georgia, the Carolinas, Alabama, and Tennessee could only exacerbate the power outage concern later this week as we loosen up those roots on those trees. With a more wet soil. So, kind of a catch-22. You want the rain, but you also don't want to increase any threat of power outages. All right, final thing I'll talk about here are temperatures. We'll go ahead and move this ahead into time, assuming it wants to work properly. We'll go ahead and refresh the page just so it works better. There we go. So again, it's going to be hot where it's not raining. We're under this big ridge over much of the country. It's well above average temperature-wise out west. It's going to stay that way. In the east, again, wherever we see some rain, for example, this is Wednesday afternoon, wherever this kind of weak front with some rain is setting up shop, going to see cooler temperatures just due to the cloud cover and precipitation that's falling. And then obviously cooler temperatures due to Helene, just due to the rain, obviously not really a cold air mass by any means. Definitely not. Again, it's a hurricane after all. But unfortunately, outside of there, it's going to stay hot for a while. Now, there are signs at the end of the month. I'll move this ahead. You see a front trying to work on through and bring kind of relief from the heat here to start October. We'll see if that happens. It's a way out there. The models kind of somewhat agree that some sort of front may try to work on through. Again, just kind of far out into time. So we'll monitor it for sure, and I'll keep you up to date on that. But that's the latest I got for you here on this Monday. Hopefully you found some use in the video. Again, if you haven't already subscribed, please do so. Like the video, comment, let me know where you're watching from, and have a wonderful rest of your Monday. Stay safe out there. Keep an eye to the sky, and I'll see you all next time.